Okay, let's get going. All right, so hello everyone. Thank you for joining us today for our HashiCorp Solutions Engineering Hangout hosted by Ranjit Viswakumar. Today we're going to talk about HashiCorp Terraform. HashiCorp Terraform uses infrastructure as code in order to provision any cloud infrastructure in service. Ranjit is going to discuss how to transition from Terraform open source to enterprise. Moving from an open source workflow to enterprise can be a culture shock with the GUI, VCS integration, and variables. He will teach you ways to make that transition as easy as possible. I also want to note that the Hangout is being recorded and will be made available post-processing, usually within a day or two. I will email it all to you in the post-show email. The demo will be about 20 minutes, and then we will allow up to 30 minutes afterwards for questions. Please submit your questions throughout the demo using the Zoom chat portal, and we will answer them at the end. So with that, let's go ahead and get started. Take it away, Ranjit.
Thanks, Brianna. So my name is Ranjit. I'm a solutions engineer for HashiCorp out of the Boston area. And so we're going to talk about open source to enterprise. So to start, to paint the picture, this is our landscape here. So imagine we're a company. We have a very heavy use of Terraform open source. All of our people are used to running it on the command line. They're typing Terraform plan, Terraform apply. That's what they're comfortable with. That's their day-to-day. A lot of our pipelines, they actually also have scripts that use the Terraform command line and kick off Terraform in that way. So the mandate from corporate, though, is now there's a lot of excess building going on. They're not really sure who's doing what pipelines are creating what. Everyone sort of has keys to do whatever they need to do. So they really want to control cost, and they really want to make sure we can start doing things like tagging resources, mandatory tags, so that when it comes time to do chargeback or just auditing, we know who created what and what projects they're attached to, so on and so forth. So with Terraform Enterprise, though, what we're trying to avoid is this headache or pain that we have to go through for now retraining all our employees on how to go from open source into an enterprise workflow. Many folks may not be comfortable writing API calls or logging into the UI feels slow to them. They would rather just maintain a command line workflow because that's what they're used to. Maybe as a longer term project, the idea will be transitioning into more REST API kind of workflows. But in the immediate, we need to make sure that our people are comfortable with the day-to-day. And generally, if you adopt a new workflow and people get a bad taste in their mouth over it, they're just going to kind of push back, right? And they don't want to do it, and they're going to avoid it as long as they can. So let's explore what an open source workflow would look like to start. So my interaction with Terraform open source command line, my code that I'm using, I'm probably writing on my laptop, so it's from my local disk. Hopefully I'm also stashing that in version control. When I run Terraform, I'm drawing state, and that's going to be stored either locally on my laptop, or I have to configure some sort of backend where I'm going to stash that. My keys are going to be probably in my environment variables. In this demo, we're going to use AWS. So I have an access key and a secret key that I've recorded in my environment. And then for governance, everyone does this differently. There's probably some sort of peer review where I need to do a pull request and someone needs to okay it or something like that. It's really based on just talking to my peers and my colleagues around me. But also sometimes in a pinch, if I just need to get something out before close of business, I maybe have the ability to do some quick action and just build. And then maybe also in a sandbox manner, I don't need really peer review. I can build whatever I want to build because it's a sandbox. So very different styles going there. So our assumptions then of the enterprise workflow is, okay, now we're going to move over to using the UI or making API calls with a token. So that's going to feel different. Rather than having code directly on my laptop, I know that Terraform Enterprise integrates with my VCS system and it pulls it directly from there with webhooks. So that's going to feel different. State-wise, instead of having that state stored on my laptops or stored in my CI/CD pipelines, it's going to be stored centrally on the enterprise server, and you're going to have role-based access control if you want to access that. So that workflow feels drastically different. And as far as keys go, I can no longer use keys that I have saved on my laptop or that I have embedded in my pipelines. The keys actually reside encrypted on the enterprise server. So that's going to change my world. And then lastly, for governance, because things are centrally operating through the enterprise server, now corporate or security, whomever has the ability to use the Sentinel policy engine to actually inspect what we're doing and make sure that it's compliant, it's cost effective, and any other sort of policies that they want to push out over time. So it's going to feel different going from A to B. So the idea here is let's try to keep what I know, which is the command line workflow, while also exercising these enterprise features and making security happy that we're compliant or we're cost effective or whatever it is. So I'll jump over first and show you a typical open source workflow. So I'm on the command line. I have just a really simple set of Terraform code here, interacting with the AWS provider and just building a single web instance. Notice here that I have some tags that are commented out. We're gonna deal with that later. I've intentionally not tagged this resource, so it'll feel like uncompliance later. So I'll do a Terraform init. This is gonna download all my plugins that I need right there on my laptop, and then I can go ahead and Terraform apply. So because I do this day to day, I'm really used to reading all this output. I understand what it's doing for me. I'm about to create one instance. It has all the following attributes about it. It looks good to me. I'll go ahead and type yes. And very shortly, I should just have one instance up and running in Terraform. This is the part where I need like background music while this goes on. All right, so now I have one instance. So let's say now I'm working very quickly and I need to get something out. And so number one, I haven't tagged my instance, but number two, let's say I accidentally fat finger this and I put down 11 because I accidentally hit the one key twice. I haven't caught this. I'm working fast. I'm just gonna go and push this out. No one's really checking my work because I have my own keys. I can sort of do this. And then if I see Terraform, I'll do a plan so I don't actually build this. But if I do a plan and I'm sort of reading through the output very quickly and I'm sort of tricking myself in my head that everything looks right, I may not see that the plan is actually going to add 10 things or 11 things instead of just one. So I'm in danger of now overbuilding and then having to explain that or catch that later, or maybe these things are going to live for the next 2 months and I'm only actually using one instance and I don't realize. So that would be an open source workflow. It's kind of on me to manage and make sure I'm doing all the good things. So now I'll switch over to Terraform Enterprise and we'll look at an enterprise workflow. So for a straight ideal enterprise workflow, first thing I would log into Terraform Enterprise and this would be my view. I have what we call an organization. It's called ranjit-org. And I can add what we call workspaces, which are basically equivalent to a state file, a set of code with state, with variables that's gonna run and update and keep track of itself. So normally what I do is I'd come in here, I'd add a workspace. Terraform Enterprise is connected to my GitHub. So it's gonna be able to enumerate all the repositories that I have. I have sort of a dummy workspace that just spits out random numbers. So I'll select it. I can create that. I can configure my variables. So now rather than supplying variables through code or through environment variables, I'll come in here and add some. So maybe There's a region variable that I need. We'll set it to USD Swan. And then maybe for this particular set of code, there's something called a password, and I can actually put my password in here and then mark it as sensitive, which allows me to obfuscate the value. So actually after it's set, no one can come in here and read that value. The best they can do is overwrite the value, but once it's set, it's hidden sort of forever. So after that, I can come in here, I can look at the settings of what this thing is doing. And one thing that's important is the version of Terraform. What we find is in an open source world, I may have downloaded Terraform this week because I'm new to it, but my colleague downloaded Terraform 6 months ago, so they have a different version. And then my other colleague downloaded it last year. Maybe he's running a different version. So there are some syntax changes, especially when going from O.11 to O.12. So we want to be sure that everyone's sort of operating on the same version of Terraform. But in the enterprise workflow, I can say, hey, I know this repository, it actually operates on an older version of Terraform, so I'm going to ask it to use O.11 instead. And so after I've configured this all in the GUI or through the API, I can queue the plan and let it run. So then we'll see that the plan will queue, it'll actually do some policy, and then it'll go forth and apply. So we'll let that run. So this would be a typical enterprise workflow. So if I was sort of operating greenfield and adopting enterprise and building everything fresh, this is what I would probably build like. But as you can see, it's very different from what I did before in the enterprise, or sorry, the open source workflow, where I had users on command line doing that sort of thing. So what I'm trying not to do is to tell my folks, everything you were doing before, we're going to do it this way. And that's how it is. That's going to be very painful. So what I'm going to do is now use a feature called a remote enhanced backend. And so I'll put my command line on this side, and I'll put my GUI on this side. So I have a file here that's queued up. It's called workspace.tf, but of course you can call it anything you need. But it's a few lines of Terraform code where I'm gonna point to Terraform Enterprise and say, go to the Ranjit org, and I'm going to create a workspace called BU1234. And what gives me access to this, actually, in Terraform, someone's going to have to go and assign me a token. So that's a matter of either signing in here or having an admin come in here for you and just creating a token for you and issuing a token. And that token's going to give you access to do certain things. Maybe you can run code, but you can't create policy. Or maybe you can read out of a workspace, but you can't actually edit that workspace. So that's up to you what those permissions are. But I have a token in my environment variable that allows me to actually create workspaces and do Terraform runs. So to initialize this, I'm going to use the Terraform init command. So just have to add a few lines of code, do Terraform init, and then it's going to notice now that I'm switching backends. So it's going to ask me, do you want to copy your stuff into the new backend? And we can see already on the right here that a workspace has been created for me. So it's up to you whether you want to actually copy state or not. You probably want to copy state so that you're operating on a level playing field. So now we'll copy our state from what I have on my laptop and it'll land in the workspace. The next thing that I want to do is I want to sort of disable the original state that I was doing. And that's my local state file here. Here, I'll move this up. So whatever I'm doing, whether it's like an S3 bucket or it's local state storage, I need to make sure that I take it out of the picture so that there's not two state files operating. So I'm just going to take this and move it out of the way so that Terraform's not confused. Okay, so now I'll do a Terraform apply. so I'll see is on the left side, it's still going to give me that command line experience. It is going to offer me a URL in the browser if I want to see this in the UI. We can see that it's kicked off a plan already over here. I can grab this URL and let it rip. And we run into this error. It's telling me I don't have credentials for AWS. So remember, in the open source workflow, my environment variables were being used in order to execute this. But now that we're going through the enterprise server, we need to actually load the variables in the enterprise server. And that way they can be centrally managed and rotated by some ops team or something like that without having the developers have to worry about credentials. And also if you have 100 developers, you don't necessarily want to issue 100 set of credentials to everyone. You want to run it through some sort of pipeline. So I can come into the GUI and I can add stuff manually this way. But we also have a community tool called TF Helper, which is a command line tool to interact with workspaces. So if I scroll down a little bit, we have some options to push configs, push variables, pull, all these kinds of commands. So I can stay in like a scripting workflow and I don't have to worry necessarily about maybe logging into the UI to load all my variables. So because I have things saved in my environment already, looking at the documentation, it's going to tell me that I need to set some environment variables. What org am I looking at and what workspace am I looking at? So that's the ranjit-org and the BU12345. And then I can run a command like this to push variables into that workspace. So I'm just pulling from my environment and pushing into the workspace, marking some of these variables as sensitive. So if I look back in the UI and I refresh, now I've got my variables. The keys are marked as sensitive. So again, no one can view them after they've been created. And so now I'm ready to roll. So now let me try another apply. I should be doing plans, but just for the sake of time, I'll go right to the apply. So let's actually watch the run here as well. So whether I'm a UI person, I want to come in here, I want to view this here, that's good. It's keeping a record of all the runs over time. On the left side, I have my command line experience and we're good. Okay, so some things have happened. So looking on the right side here, it looks like we have two policies that are taking effect. Number one, there's a enforce mandatory tags policy. So what we see is there's a lot of resources out there that don't even have the attribute as tags. So they're not tagged, that's not gonna fly. And the other policy is the cost limit. So if you take a look here, and it shows up here, let's see, as well. The thing that I'm trying to build cost almost $93, and that's over the limit, which has been set to $55 for me. So that's the policy that has been set on my organization. You can't build something at any one point that costs more than $55. So as far as I know, I was only trying to build one instance. So it's surprising to me, why is it saying that it's $92? So if I take a look at my code again, maybe I take a look at this and I say, oh, you know what? That was my mistake. I totally fat-fingered that. No wonder it cost so much. I'm glad that got caught. Otherwise, it would have just happened, built 10 instances, no problem. The other thing while I'm here is I see that I need to mandatorily tag my stuff. So I'm here, let's get that done. Everything needs to be tagged from now on. And I'll go and tag that. Now I think I'm good. So I'll run another apply. And while that's running on the left, I'll show you where this policy is coming from. That's over here, the settings for the workspace and the org. That can be controlled by someone with token privileges. So of course you don't give people to edit their own policy. what we're doing is we're requiring tags and limiting costs. And I just set some arbitrary budgets here. So for dev, it's 55, for test, it's 55, for prod, it's 25. So you can play with these numbers. You can write new policies, customize it to whatever you need, and like anything else, parameterize them so you can reuse them over and over and have them be useful. So now it looks like we're in a good spot over here. For the mandatory tags policy, we passed that. And now this is a more reasonable cost, about $9.12. That's what I was expecting. That's on the limit, so that's allowed. I'll hit yes and let that build. If we take a look, whereas on this side, when we update our state, the state gets constantly updated in place, at least now. On the enterprise side, since it's storing state, storing history, I can view, this is my first state when I first came in here. And then for what I just did now, it recorded the new state. I can take a look at the diff about what changed from state to state. So this one was pretty simple. All it had to do is add some tags to the machine. So that's what I have to show. Again, to summarize, on the left side, me as a Terraform command line coming from open source sort of person, I can still adopt the Terraform Enterprise features and use policy and cost control and all that stuff without affecting and disrupting my Terraform open source users too much. It's just a little bit of code that they have to add, and they have to get a token, but they can be onboarded into Enterprise fairly quickly.
Thank you, Ranjit. Okay, so now we'll do the Q&A. We've already got a few in there, but if you have any questions, please submit them in the Q&A portal. Okay, so first question. We noticed that workspaces in TFE are created ad hoc when a project references them in the remote block, while on the other hand, my team prefers to pre-create workspaces for each project because we want to add some variables, enforce naming schemes, etc. Is that by design? If so, what is the reasoning behind that? If not, will it be fixed?
Yeah, so the particular token that I have allows me to do pretty much anything. But where you want to divide responsibilities, yeah, you would have like an organization admin who has the ability to create and manage workspaces. And then they would have one set of permissions. Then they would issue a token to the users, which would just give them the ability to run those workspaces, not actually edit them or manage them.
Okay, thank you. Okay, next one. How does the workflow differ between self-hosted Terraform Enterprise and Terraform Cloud?
Yeah, that's a good question. So for what I've done, not much changes. In this little block of code here, if you don't specify a server, it's just going to go to the Terraform Cloud. But if you did have a self-hosted Terraform Enterprise on-prem, you would just have to add the destination of that, the domain, and path to it.
Okay, great. Okay, next one. Is it possible on AWS to use instance profiles in role assumption instead of having to manage user credentials?
So that's for Terraform to actually go out and build stuff. It's using the IAM role instead of keys. If that's the question, then yes, if you take a look at the AWS provider, it does have an assume function in there. That's sort of something that's in the provider. So we can make use of that, whether you're using open source or enterprise, actually.
Okay. Next one. Where is the machine running Terraform? And can it integrate to on-premises resources?
Yeah, so in this demo, I'm using Terraform Cloud. That's our SaaS platform that we run. So that's one tier of sort of features that you have. It's a multi-tenant platform, so obviously you're sharing some things with the different customers that are on Terraform Cloud. If you wanted Terraform Cloud to provision the resources on-prem, you can certainly do so, but then you probably find yourself punching holes in your firewall so that the cloud platform can reach into your data center. So in that case, most often we see customers go with the on-prem solution where they deploy, they can deploy Terraform right on a VM or If you have a VMware or something like that, we can deploy it there. And that way it's closer to all the on-prem APIs that it needs to reach out to.
Okay. Next one. Are there any limits to the number of resources in a state? We have one project workspace, which with over 650 resources with the tendency to grow. Should we split it up somehow to decrease the number of tracked resources?
Yes, as far as the limit, I'm sure there's some theoretical limit, like, I don't know, 65,000 something, but for practical purposes, yeah, the more resources that you have in a state, you have to imagine that every time you run a plan, it has to go and do a lookup on all of those to make sure that they're still where they should be. So the more things you have in there, the more checks that it has to do. So probably when you get to the point of a 2 to 3 minute plan and apply, the way you want to start looking at it is see if there's things in there that you can modularize, see if there's things in there that you can split up. So maybe if I have a web app, I can have one state file for the web side and one state file for the database side. And actually there are ways you can share values. So maybe the database outputs a connection string, and then the workspace for the website can consume that value using remote state. So that sort of thing you can do in open source. It's sort of built into Enterprise where I can have one workspace publish a value that a second workspace can then consume. So I can split that up easily.
Okay, great. Okay, next question. Can variables be sourced from a separate vault, or do they need to be added explicitly?
Yeah, so I would say there are some variables that you can just put directly into Terraform Enterprise, but then there are other variables that definitely you'd want to pull from Vault. So for example, I used a set of Amazon keys to build. So that kind of stuff can be deposited directly in the workspace. But let's say I'm building, again, that web app, and that website needs a password to connect to the database. That should be pulled from probably Vault directly, not stored in a workspace variable. So there are use cases for both.
Okay. What is the purpose of having multiple state versions and seeing the diff?
Yeah, so this usually comes up for a lot of our customers that have auditing needs. They want to know who changed what, when, what did it used to be, what is it now? They want to attach that to a particular Git commit, because maybe on that commit there's also a history of approvals and a conversation about a pull request. But the question of like, what was it before it changed is very important to some customers.
All right, and then does the Sentinel policies tie into any enterprise policy tools such as Dome9 or Prisma?
Yeah, so we have added a lot of functionality into Sentinel for making HTTP calls to external sources to pull data and make decisions on. That's really, there's a lot of development going on there, so we don't have like an out-of-the-box integration with Dome9, for example. But what we have is we're trying to make it very pluggable so that these kinds of outgoing calls can be made.
Okay, awesome. Can you explain the auto.tfvars behavior and how, if you're using terraform.tfvars, that gets overwritten by the variables entered in the GUI?
Yeah, so the first time you create a workspace, when you saw me do it, it said for a little bit there, like configuring and setting up variables. So when you create a workspace, it's going to read in the automatic variables and populate them. Thereafter, if you update them in the UI, those will just take effect. So it's only during the onboarding that the automatic variables come into place.
Okay, great. And then we have a few more questions here. So if you have any more, please submit them. But do you have any resources for deploying Terraform Enterprise on Kubernetes?
It's a weird question because Terraform Enterprise is actually a clustered technology in itself. So to take like a container technology and deploy it into Kubernetes, like we sort of do our own sort of containerizing. So We can talk more about that, but it's a kind of a weird discussion.
Okay. For new customers moving to TFE, is it possible to keep the OSS Terraform functioning while lining up TFE?
So for OSS TF, it's really just the binary that lives on your laptop or that is on the system that your pipeline is running. There's not a lot of infrastructure. You can think about it as I have the Git command line tool on my laptop, and I can do Git all day just locally on my laptop, but then the moment I want to start collaborating, I probably sign up on GitHub. So now I can push stuff to a server that somebody else can pull. So similar to that, if I'm doing open source, I have simply a Terraform binary on my laptop. There's no infrastructure. But when I have Terraform Enterprise, now I have a server that's up and running where I can push stuff to and other people can collaborate on. So I hope that answers the question.
Okay, awesome. Doesn't look like any more are coming through. I'll just give another few seconds in case anyone has any last minute questions. Okay, perfect. All right, thank you, Ranjit, for answering all those questions. As I mentioned at the beginning, this Hangout was recorded and will be made available on our website, as well as I will send it all to you post-webinar. If you liked what you heard today and you want to start exploring Terraform, I encourage you to check out our Learn site. You can find it on our website at learn.hashicorp.com/Terraform. I hope you all enjoyed today's Hangout and have a better understanding of the Terraform Enterprise features. Thanks for hanging out with us today, and a big thank you to Ranjit for his time. Have a great rest of your day. Bye, everyone.